I'd like to call to order the July 28th Ordinance Committee meeting. With that, please call.
Council McGee.
Here.
Council Calucci.
Here.
Council Hamel.
Here. And I just want to say for, procedurally, John is joining us in the stead of Jean Marie, who's not with us. So he will be a full voting member. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So what I'd like to do before we get started is I just wanted to, we'll begin with the approval of the minutes, and then I had a slight agenda change. So why don't we go ahead with the minutes, if you've had a chance to read those. There is any comment or revision or changes? And those are from the June 16th meeting.
Motion to approve.
Okay, second.
I was,
You were not here, so
was not.
I will second.
Okay.
Council Calucci.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes. So with that, I'd like to do just a quick setup. Our agenda today is focused on several items that, we feel touch in some way on the ordinance committee scope. So we're going to kind of wade through them, and at least in sort of order of what we felt was some sort of urgency or priority. And we try to, as I said before, try to do it based upon what we expect is coming up, something coming up in September. The comfort and renewal, and then the zoning ordinance and growth management are also things that are current topics that we thought we would speak to in terms to determine if there is an ordinance committee action or activity that we should commit to for that. The other two items, marijuana cultivation, it's made its way through the long range planning committee, was discussed at the last meeting. And I think it's going to be moving to the planning board for details. There are a couple of individuals seeking to establish those activities in the RF zone. So the other one that is a relatively new one, John Anderson helped us bring it up, and it was around the light industrial zone. So we're going to kind of leave those to the end and try to spend our time on those top three. So with that, though, I'd like to make a motion to change the agenda and to take some time here at the outset for general public comment. We'll also have public comment along the way on each agenda item. So if I could request a motion to that effect.
Motion to public comment.
Okay, in a second.
Second.
Thanks, John.
Council McGee.
Yes.
Council Calucci.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes. So then I'd like to ask if there's anybody here who would like to make the general public comment for anything that's not on the agenda. Okay, so with that, then I don't see anyone online who is interested in doing that.
No one currently.
Good. So we'll move right ahead. So I thought with this, and John, not to put you on the spot, but I think that we were following your lead and that of the council on the issue of the renewal of the innkeeper's license for Comfort Inn. So I thought we'd maybe spend some time talking about that and touch points that there are from an ordinance standpoint, and to see if there's anything that could or should be done by ordinance as it relates to that particular item that's due to come back to us in September.
Sure. I don't have anything prepared, but I will say it is, we're due to get an update in August from staff at our regular meeting. And then in September, it will be before us again for the approval of their renewal, their business license. Going through this process and kind of looking at what's happened, it may make sense to review the ordinance, the innkeeper's ordinance, to see if it's still fully relevant. I know that there's some differences between ours and what other municipalities do that we might want to try to understand better, and that would fit in with the ordinance committee's work. One thing is we allow stays up to 180 days. A lot of communities limit it to 30 days. There's pros and cons of doing that. Another thing is if you are doing an extended stay, we may want to consider restricting an operator's ability to evict without going through due process. Like, we've hit a lot of requests through general assistance for people that were just kicked out on very short notice. And then we are stuck with compensating we're trying to place them somewhere at a very high rate for a short period of time and then try to revisit it again. So I do think there may be some tweaks that can be made. I don't know when the last time it was amended or looked at. Given what we've gone through this year, I would support looking at that.
Now, is it, Nick, any comment on that? Any other thoughts about that? Thanks, John. By the way, and I'm sorry, apologies for not getting, teeing that up for you ahead of time, but I thought you'd be very
Happy to talk about it.
without much prompting.
Yeah, just general observation of the state is that I think based on what we're experiencing, and company that's probably worth reviewing authorities to make sure it is up to date. It reflects what we want to see here in the community. So, John, on this one, it makes sense to have a good look at it.
Okay. One thought I had about it is that, the last thing we want to do is to take action and then kind of create a bigger problem. So I think we touched on this a little bit at the last meeting when we heard from folks that were staying, some 91 people with 20 or 10 or 15 or so who spoke at the meeting, in very honest and direct terms about how important the ability to stay there was for them, number one, and how they felt that there was some improvements there. But it's not really just an issue about the 91 people at the Comfort Inn, right? It's a bigger issue for those that are in similar situations, but also for others. There are a number of other properties in town that have worked for a long time, having folks as long-term residents there who have no place else to go. And also who may go from place to place. They might go from, the Pride Motel to the Downeaster, or some that have also been there for a long time just because it's a low-cost place to stay longer term in the town of Scarborough. So I wanted to, to spend some time on that and to, to see what the sentiment was about how we would go at it. We look at the under 80 day allowance now, but if there's, other discussion on what the options might be and what the implications might be from doing that. Because I think the last thing we want to do is sort of implement something and then have a shock load of people who go to GA and then drives a big number for us in terms of expense, or we just create this problem at all the other places in town that are operating in a similar way. So.
I think another angle on this, similar to Candlewood Suites, where they were looking to convert from a business extended stay hotel to more multifamily use. I know that I think we have Housing Alliance
Yes.
investigating that. I don't know if you have an update, but
Yeah, they've talked about it each of the last two meetings, so I expect they're going to check probably a final check-in at their next meeting, which is next week. And we'll be providing a memo of sorts that provides some observations, if you will, and that's what I think they were tasked with doing. Depending on the acceptance of those observations and recommendations, there may be some different ordinances that fall from that in terms of creating a path forward for conversion of hotels to multifamily. I don't think the Alliance really talked much about conversion to homeless shelters necessarily, but there may be some of their observations are helpful in that regard too. So that's forthcoming.
Thanks, Tom. That's encouraging to hear that. I remember when we heard from Candlewood Suites the first time around, we felt there were very positive things they were attempting to do, and they just didn't they weren't far enough along, and we hadn't had the time to really socialize them fully. So I think that's encouraging as another possible source of housing stock, temporary housing stock. There's a related issue there, however, that I've heard about where we're not able to discriminate against people on the basis of their housing status or even on the basis of whatever disability or mental health need they might be dealing with. So I'm just wondering, is that, Tom, John, Nick, if you have any thoughts on that, or if we feel that is a risk or something we need to explore. I'm thinking mainly along the distinction how other places have tried to do it with folks that are asylum seekers or migrants who, in some cases, are actually sponsored by an agency, Catholic Charities or someone like that, to be able to find housing. That's a little bit different than others that may not be similarly situated.
so I don't really view it as in terms of who they're accommodating as guests are providing housing to. Their business owners, and they're trying to make a return on their investment or their property. the market that they had was business class travel that evaporated. They're trying to identify other ways that they can stay afloat. This is an opportunity that presented itself that a bunch of hotels gravitated towards. A lot of them have since retracted. But that's not to say they might come back. So, from my perspective, as a business owner, they reserve the right to refuse service to whoever they want. You're right that they can't discriminate on the basis of, a whole number of things,
Yeah.
but they can deny service.
Yeah.
But to me, the more opportunities you allow for that business owner to be successful, the less likely it's going to be that they're going to resort to operating a homeless shelter without any prior approvals or communication.
So if I hear your argument correctly, then that's arguing in favor of just expanding the stock and the type of housing available, that in itself is pretty good thing, right? And not only for the operator, but from the demand side.
Allowing them to do something other than short-term stays is, to me, one path.
So for what it's worth, I think that's what I struggle with most is it seems like a change of use or a change of business type being operated in under a certain set of parameters that are no longer applicable. It's not what they're doing anymore. It's not what they told us they would be operating in the community. So I think that's where I get caught up a little bit, which is, I think if we want to talk about shelters and things of that nature, probably should be some parameters around what that looks like. It should go through a public process and a different licensing. So that's, I think, for what it's worth, that's the other reason I would support kind of reviewing not just, the innkeeper's license portion of this, but it's so tied into other topics right now, how it impacts, general assistance, landlord tenant rights now. I mean, it gets into a whole host of other issues. And I think the first thing before us is really try to tackle the innkeeper's license, make sure innkeepers are operating as innkeepers. And then if this community needs to do something more, we should be having that discussion too, at least, trying to figure out the best path forward for a business model of that nature. So, but that's kind of where I fall on this.
So if we were trying to break this down, how would it work if we were to try to focus on the immediate question about the 180-day license and to try to get a point of view on that by September, but also to, perhaps on a dual path, begin the organizing process around the longer term question, right?
Yeah, if I could,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, that's a fairly simple and kind of surgical change.
Yeah.
That's in the definition in our zoning ordinance for
Yeah.
hotel stay. So that's just a definition change, frankly.
Yeah.
That would change and that's certainly complicated our recent experience because it could be argued that they have not yet had continuous stays beyond that. And so they're still technically under our definition operating in compliance when we all know it's not.
I
So
mean, like they check out for a day and check back in, or some sort of break.
I suppose, I mean, monitoring that and being accurate with the records over 20 hotels is, I'll admit, nearly impossible. But I think that's the simplest and maybe the best first start is to look at your definition of what is a hotel first. And then certainly you could take a look at the innkeeper's license itself. I think it does a fairly decent job for what it is. So yeah, that's what I would suggest if you want to start leaning into this issue. That's probably the easiest place to start.
And what's the sentiment on how to do that? Is this something we would do in committee, do an ordinance committee, or do you want to? I'm a little weary of establishing ad hoc groups for too many things if they're going to be short in duration and, so I don't see this really as an ad hoc committee like we've had in the past that have been, really long standing and gone very deep on issues, but I'm open to other thoughts on how to process. John, go ahead. You get a special exemption from the general comment.
But we're doing public comment for each item, right? So, just to share my thoughts, and again, I think the piece I'm struggling with from what I'm hearing is yes, we have the Comfort Inn issue. I'm not sure if we need to change anything in our current ordinances around that. Like, I think the ordinance, as Counselor McGee prescribed, like that's for a specific purpose for these types of businesses. I think what you said, though, that resonated with me was we probably need a bigger conversation about what we're going to do going forward in terms of homelessness. And so I feel like as a council, we need to align on like, what's our policy objective there? Are we all in agreement that we need to kind of start going down the path of allowing homeless shelters in Scarborough? I think that was something, Councilor Hamel, you said a few weeks ago in one of the council meetings where you were talking about how this problem isn't going to go away. Yes, we have to deal with this current issue with the Comfort Inn. However, what's the long-term solution? And I think part of that has to be having that conversation around homelessness. I was just interested after the meeting to just see what other towns are doing. So what I found was, prior to COVID, Brunswick actually went through this whole process to update their zoning, add homelessness or homeless shelters as a specific licensed business, where they had specific criteria that they needed to go through. They established a task force within the community to help shape that. Farmington right now is actually going through a similar process, where they're kind of looking at their zoning, and it's being led by their zoning board, where they're kind of going through and looking at the zoning to figure out how to change things. What's interesting from what I could gather from Farmington is they were getting so strict in the parameters or the performance criteria they're trying to establish that now it looks like a lot of nonprofits and groups who deal with homelessness are coming in and saying, whoa, you guys are going way too far to the left. You need to kind of come back into the center. So again, I think there's a lot of stuff that other communities are doing that it might be worth seeing if there's somebody like Brunswick, especially, which I think has kind of dealt with this and kind of decided they wanted to tackle and build homeless shelters into their zoning and have done so. We can probably learn a lot from them. We can also watch Farmington and see what they're doing. I'm not sure exactly what they've settled on. It looks like they've tabled it up to this point, but for me, I think it's really for the council to decide what's our policy objective here now around homelessness, because I think hopefully we all agree that it's not going away and we have to figure out a longer term solution. But what's our objective? And then to me, it does make sense, as somebody said, that we probably need to really engage the public in this conversation because it's something very different than what we've had to deal with. And I don't think we have anything in our zoning or anything around this topic. So.
Okay, thanks, John. So I want to pursue that a little bit further, but before that, does it seem like we have consensus on at least the approach for Comfort Inn that would be to look at the ordinances to try to determine if there's anything that could and should be done and recommended between now and September when they're back in front of us again, or maybe it's something as simple as just going on the current path, and that's holding them accountable for the conditions that were established in the past several months.
So I think looking at the ordinance in terms of how you do it, whether you task staff for recommendations or just have the committee read it and share your thoughts next time. You
Okay.
meet. I did want to add to what John said that there is support at the council leadership level to have a discussion around homelessness, and public safety had one, some guest speaker in probably a week or two ago.
Great.
Who's actually very knowledgeable that we're going to try to see if we can coordinate something for the full council to participate in.
Okay. So does that seem like a reasonable way to draw the line on this, at least from an ordinance standpoint? We would come back with, and Tom, I want to defer to you and staff in terms of the commitment there, but if we come back the third week of August with the recommendation, is that practical?
I'm not sure a recommendation about what I would know. I would also note I'm without a town planner as we speak. So,
Yeah.
I'm not in staff's not at its full complement to be, providing detailed support, substantive support to the council. Sorry, just escaped me. To Councilor Clucci's point, I also attended that meeting that was hosted at the Public Safety Building. I think there'd be great value to the council and to the public to hear Colin, I think his name was, and he ran the Oxford Street Shelter in Portland. He really helped me understand anyway, kind of putting homelessness in context statewide. And, we're seeing it kind of front and center for the first time. I guess I would caution us not to knee jerk and react yet. I think we need to better understand what it means in the larger state context, regional context, and where, if at all, Scarborough might play a role in this.
And this is Colin, he's a resident, right? Is he-
Yeah, forgive
he's
me, I
with
don't
South
know.
Portland Housing Authority, just.
No, I believe he worked for the city of Portland at the Oxford Street Shelter, but he is really a statewide expert, and really just putting homelessness in context, I think would be a good baseline for the council to establish as you kind of dive into this issue, because it's thorny and it's difficult, and it's something we ought to really be prepared for if we're getting into it. Just worth noting maybe for the public's benefit is that no one asked our permission. What's happening at the Comfort Inn and other establishments prior happened on its own. And, it's really presented a unique challenge as to how we deal with it. Thank goodness we do have a license process in place, which has given the council an opportunity to bring the establishments before council to ask important questions to understand what is going on down there. And in this case, imposing conditions that we think are moving in the direction of making it more, certainly a safer environment for those living there, and ideally more acceptable to our community.
Okay, so it seems we've got pretty good consensus around the need for some sort of short-term and longer-term approaches to this. I agree completely with the discussion about the longer-term issues and the need for us to connect with folks that are experts in the area, the social services organizations and the folks that you mentioned. So, but so I don't see any action for us on that one as a committee, unless at this point, I mean,
I just want to
Go ahead.
quickly clarify, are we still, as a committee, going to review the license?
yes, I'm gonna
and
come back to that.
Definitions?
I thought I'd-
Yeah, okay,
Punt on the longer-term one.
Okay.
And come back to the one that I think we actually can take on as an action item, if that's so. So I think we'll go, and it's over to John and leadership and Tom to
Mhm.
decide when you want to do this. And I know we get, I know you've got staff deficits in a couple of areas, so.
I mean, it would be a very light lift for your next meeting. We could provide you a copy of the innkeeper's license ordinance in process for review, as well as the zoning ordinance definition of hotel. Those are two things that exist that wouldn't, don't require any deep staff commitment, if you will. I think they're relevant in one respect or another. And I think there's something that this committee is certainly capable of picking up, reading, and having a conversation around.
So I will tell you, my bias is to, find as many shingles as we can to nail down on the roof before it blows off. Okay, so excuse the metaphor, but I want to see if there's anything we can do immediately. And I think among the three of us, we should be able to do that, from an ordinance standpoint. So, right, so can I have a motion to that effect then?
a motion to, phrase that, review the innkeeper's license. Hotel.
And I would just add to that, any other relevant ordinances that may pertain to that. Thank you.
Second that.
Second. I know it was the little addendum that really pushed it over the line.
Council McGee,
Yes.
Council Calucci,
Yes.
Council Hamel,
Yes, thank you. And then for the other one, we'll look forward to, John and Ken for learning more. I had a conversation with Brian Shumway before the meeting, and Housing Alliance folks are interested in participating in this as well from a supply standpoint. So
And if I could add on to that real quick, and I know you need to meet his leadership and with Tom, I would just ask that it would be helpful if anything comes forward, either educationally or, for review purposes, kind of that really big picture. So how does GA fit in? How does mental health fit in? How does shelters? It's a huge,
It was eye-opening. A lot of
Yeah.
that was included with.
It was,
with
okay.
specific- And he was pretty clear that, putting a bunch of people in a hotel is not the solution. There's kind of pretty well-known supports for different types of.
oh, sure.
homeless
So-
people that are affected.
So it sounds like that's what I should expect then.
Yes.
Because, yeah, I just wanted to make sure that because there's so many facets to it, you know.
Great.
I just want to add to like maybe one of the vulnerabilities that we need to better understand based on the model that's happening today, because I haven't read the article, but one was sent to me and I heard about it that in Saco, Catholic Charities is doing something similar to what's happening, and apparently it's leading to like 100 children going into the school system. And while I think at the Comfort Inn, there's only one person in the school system, apparently, you know, if all of a sudden something happens and we get 100 kids going into our school system, that could put the schools at risk because they don't have the space. So better understanding from a town perspective, like what can we control or not control, that if something like that were to happen, how could we manage and handle it?
Any other, before we move off this agenda item, any other public comment here or online? In terms of general comments? Okay, so then we'll move to the second agenda item. I think that was the one having to do with the GMO. And thought on this was, at least to give a baseline, I think, and John, was involved in the last version of this when we revised it a year or so ago, and that was a very comprehensive revision that included a lot of what I thought were very positive improvements. I think there's still a general feeling, however, that there are aspects of that that are still include a lot of exemptions, number one, and a lot of paths to that. And number two, a feeling that there still may be a way for us to tighten that up. So it's it's more effective, easier to execute ordinance. Now some informal comments that I've heard is that, well, why don't we let the process go forward and get completed as it relates to the pending exemption from the downs. But I'd like for us to have some discussion around that, and see again here if there's a handle or an opportunity from an ordinance standpoint, yes or no, and if so, what that might be. So that broadly stated, why I put it on. So it was not a premeditated list of things we think we could change today or tomorrow with the GMO. Any other comments about that? I mean, I'd be eager to hear from folks. I will say, I don't quite understand the quote unquote curing aspect of the ordinance. So it's, I think there's a sentiment that if we are being challenged with controlling growth, that we would look to the GMO ordinance to do that. And then I heard at the same time that, we've gone back and forth over this. I was a very outspoken advocate of it. But I will say that, and maybe this is because of us moving through the phases of things that are expiring in terms of transition items, but it has not really, we're looking to the ordinance as a primary tool for us to manage growth or to control growth in some way. It doesn't really appear that ordinance is doing that. Or, so it's only been in place a year. So I'm open to discussion on that.
I just general observation that seems like I think, and this is no secret in this community, that I don't love the idea of exemptions existing within the ordinance. And I'll caveat that with with the having exemptions builds in a process for an ordinance to be kind of ignored. And I've also just coming onto the council, I've noticed that there's already been quite a bit of time dedicated to reviewing current exemption requests, with more to come, I imagine. So you have to ask yourself, is it, me personally, I would love to have a stab at rewriting this ordinance a little bit. But again, I also understand that there's not always an appetite to review something after a year. But I do believe that there are issues with the way it's currently written that I think should be cured before we get in too far ahead of ourselves. I don't know how deep you want to go into some detailed thoughts, but just in general, I would support and some maybe a look, and maybe if the ordinance committee, or I imagine this is the right spot for it. Some suggestions, some revision suggestions, I don't know. I don't know what the appetite is, of full council, but I wouldn't mind a crack at it.
Yeah, it's a new ordinance. It was a pretty huge departure from what was in place prior to it. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at it a year postmortem and seeing if there's improvements that can be made. Couple of cautions. So when you talk about growth management, that's really your comprehensive plan. That's how you're managing where you want your growth to happen and how you're going to tackle infrastructure challenges to accommodate that. The GMO, what we call our growth management ordinance, is they really call it the rate of growth ordinance at the state level, and that's just how you pace it. So your comp plans and your zoning dictates the overall growth that can happen. This just is a regulator for any given year. We adopt that ordinance. The authority for it comes from state law. And there's a couple of conditions that need to be met for you to adopt a GMO or to amend it. One of the first ones is it needs to be consistent with a comprehensive plan that's consistent with state law. We are currently in a little bit of limbo when it comes to that, whereas we approved our comp plan locally at about the same time as our GMO last year. But we're still working through with the state the final approvals. And now we're in between planning directors. So I don't exactly know where that is, but I do not believe we've actually received the approval.
No, not yet.
So having the review, I think is fine. We might need some additional conversations with legal about whether it's a good idea to actually amend it right now.
So we just want to speak to the comprehensive plan. And I agree with what John said in terms of the real limit valve here is what 140, the rolling 10-year average or whatever, in terms of units is the real control. Is that what you're referring to from a state level?
So that's another one of the criteria is that you have to allow at least as many, they call it permits, as have been issued in the past 10 years, plus 5%, somewhere around. So now that's two of the three. I forget what the second condition is.
And there are a series of things that are expiring. So that's the other issue that I was having with trying to understand the GMO is that we have certain pools and things that are expiring and they're, not all included in the GMO. I guess they're referenced, but the details not in there.
I'm not clear.
Like growth, the ones that were given to the downs for a period of time, the other ones, the rule about where you would carry forward a balance of unused growth permits.
I'm not aware of any carryover provisions, but there were some exemptions identified for one bedroom outside of the CPD that I think expire at the end of next year.
Yes.
And they've been about half of them or so have been used, maybe a little more than that. I expect they'll probably be used before the expiration date. The Downs has used all, or that expiration date has passed. All their exemptions had to be used by the end of last year.
I believe they used all but two, practically speaking.
So two just went unused.
So what about things like the periodic review of the ordinance? So, but I think things like this are a good example where those are not really, you can't read them anywhere. I mean, they're kept someplace and there's a record kept of them, but it's not easy for the public to get at those. What the current, and I know we have an Excel spreadsheet that shows sort of what was used last year and what the current balance is, but that's not, I don't know how often we update that.
Don, that's real time. That spreadsheet's linked to the clerk downstairs that manages that whole system. So that's real time information. I open for suggestions. I don't know how to make it any more transparent and available to folks that are interested in what permits have been issued to whom.
So if I wanted to find out what the current balance is today, how would I do that? Just go.
It totals at the bottom of the spreadsheet.
And it's an Excel spreadsheet and shows what the number is that hasn't been used yet.
It shows
No,
numbers
the ones that have been issued.
Pardon? Okay, but it doesn't show issued versus balance.
No, we could add that component.
So let me just use that as an example. Okay, so there's a, there's data that's publicly available. It's one element, it's one cell. It doesn't include a reconciliation. And it's a raw Excel spreadsheet. So I I kind of stand by my statement there. I think that's not as easily transparent and available as it might be. So that would be one area. I haven't reviewed this in detail, but every time we get questions on this, we point to our growth management ordinance and we say how that is what we use as a way for us to manage growth. And we get referred back to the comprehensive plan, which frankly, it doesn't have a lot of detailed numbers in it. It has descriptions about where we're going to concentrate growth and what the high growth areas are, but to my knowledge, it doesn't have corresponding numbers associated with that running totals.
Don, can I just bring you back?
Yeah.
I just opened up the report that's on our
Yeah.
website.
Yeah.
If you scroll to the right a little bit, it actually goes through the exemptions. So we had 55 one-bedroom multifamily exemptions carry over from last year.
Right.
So that means, I think 15 were used last year.
Right.
This year, we've had 28 applied for,
Right.
which leaves 27 remaining.
All right, so there's a running balance, so
So we have
27.
27 left through the end of next
Okay.
year.
All right,
Same thing with
through the end of next calendar year.
through 12/31/2023.
And that was set at the time we revised the pool to allow a period of time for those to be
Yes.
used, right? So there wasn't gonna, they weren't gonna expire.
Exactly. There's other ways that the spreadsheet breaks it out, but you can look at the total. This year, we've had 88 growth permits issued. 91 of them by exemptions. Those are primarily affordable units.
Okay. And so, but there's an example right there, right now, there is no limit on affordable. There's no cap on that all.
There's no explicit cap.
So, I mean, I would suggest that may be something for, and I'm just kind of freestyling here. I haven't studied it and didn't come forward with a long list of recommendations, but it does seem to me that there's an opportunity for us to really look at that and to see if there are other things we could try to get our hands on rather than accepting whatever affordable is going to be. And we've got another shock load of things coming potentially with accessory dwelling units. They're going to completely revise whatever we have in terms of guidelines.
Yeah, I think that
That
was one area that I had concerned with because the purpose of the GMO was, as you said, to kind of regulate the rate of growth within the community. But if you leave pools of types of housing as exempted from having to count against this ordinance, then you're really not necessarily quote unquote regulating all growth in this community. You're regulating single family dwellings and or traditional styles of building patterns. But I guess I would view a GMO as more comprehensive. I mean, I think it's the way that we monitor, track, prepare for growth in this community. And it's kind of as simple as housing is housing. And are we, I don't view anything as quote unquote good housing or bad housing necessarily. It's just, it is what it is. And each type of housing comes with its own set of challenges as far as what the community needs to prepare for, as far as whether it's an addition to school children or whether it's, into traffic impacts, or there's all sorts of different ways, different types of housing can impact the community. But if you're willing to regulate a portion of the style of development patterns, but not all of it, I feel like that's a hole. I think that a hole that probably should be plugged in general.
Yeah, I agree with Nick in that it's really an instrument to prevent you from overwhelming your resources.
Mhm.
And so we lose that part of it when we talk about the units and growth. It's really about the impact. So what's your impact on traffic? What's your impact on the schools? What's our capacity? Can we manage it or not? It's a circuit breaker, right? So it puts a stop in the action if things start coming in quicker than we've seen in the past. There's probably a better way to do it.
So let's stay with that for a moment. What would be the better way to do it then? What's the better mousetrap? So I know somebody be getting off the field from talking about ordinances, but then what are the levers? And one thing I mentioned, the one lever that the biggest dog in the pen here is the downs. You're supposed to get annual reviews from them. I don't know when. we typically do this in the
Scheduled for
fall.
September. They're on
So
schedule.
I'd say, it would be good to kind of get a handle on that and also get a better handle on the the impact of affordable. But those are two things that, kind of jump out at me as I'm looking at this. And I mean, it's interesting to me that the folks who worked on it, so John and Ken, we're still here. That, your preference is not, it really doesn't require any changes. That it really doesn't, as I understand it, you don't really feel that that's either the work is done or it's not the right lever, as you mentioned. The lever should be a comprehensive plan to manage growth and the state guidelines for growth. The 144.
So I'm not sure that that's what I was saying. So were you saying I don't think that there's any room to improve it?
Well, we haven't had a specific conversation about it, but
Right.
At least that, what I've heard is that we should wait until we complete the work with the Downs exemption before we revisit or look at the GMO again. So,
I think any ordinance is subject to review. If there's appetite in this committee to dig into the details, I do think it might be you might need to make it a little broader than what you're envisioning
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
I think there are some unforeseen consequences with changes that we made,
Yeah.
particularly for smaller developers.
Yeah.
But I think you're going to have to pull the development community and the public in
Yeah.
general and similar, it took 1.5 years, I think, to do it the last time.
Right.
I think you're looking at something along those lines.
Right. So let's stay with that for a minute. So that there's a sense then, and Nick, do you agree with that? That seems to be a longer term thing. There's no real quick fixes or no real gaping holes that should be addressed immediately.
I guess if there was sentiment enough to just identify all housing as housing and all of it has impacts, why carve out exemptions? Like, do we need a 1.5 year process or public comment on whether or not there should be exemptions built into our ordinance? Or if we should just, here's the pool of permits, good luck, guys. I think that would be, I don't know how much time you need to even start with that statement. Should there be exemptions for certain types of housing in our own growth management plans? And that's a baseline question.
If I could, I believe the reason those exemptions for affordable specifically exist in the GMO is that there are very clear policy and visionary objectives in your comprehensive plan that favor and want to promote affordable housing. And so you may not agree with it, but I think the theory is any restriction or restrictions that would not advance that policy objective, not any, but we ought to be mindful of not putting restrictions in that would retard our ability to advance these other policy objectives.
And almost every affordable unit that's been built outside of the Downs has required council participation, town participation through the form of a CA, creation of a TIF district or amendment of a TIF district. So there's other approval mechanisms kind of already built in. It wasn't a big concern that we were going to get overwhelmed, although we've been successful in the past couple of years with approving them. And a lot of them are getting permitted this year. The Downs, they're an inclusive zone. So a lot of their affordable has not come through, has not required town participation directly. I don't know how much money there is in it, that for it to be a huge concern that, all of a sudden they're going to be building 100 or 200 affordable units.
I would also note that, and this isn't necessarily suggestive of the future, but the vast majority of affordable units built in the last 5 years, I'll say, are senior focused. So as John says, there's in most cases a fairly elaborate public process involving either credit enhancement agreement or other support. And in the course of that discussion, a recognition and a discussion around what are the impacts of this project. And my recollection is with the senior focused projects, there's been a fairly common understanding that the impacts are slim on the town.
I think, for what it's worth, I mean, I understand Tom's point about the comprehensive plan outlining that we did want to see more affordable housing options in the community. I'm just not sure that that was to be interpreted as they get full exemption from any type of growth that's happening in the community. And I think that's where maybe I view that a little differently, which is all of it has an impact. And I think the impact that we're seeing is either that affordable housing that is coming through is going to ask for a TIF or a CEA, and that is requiring resources and planning on the community's part. It does impact how we plan and the impacts to our bottom line. So again, I'll go back to it. I think the exemptions, and I can understand why they might be there. I don't think as a policy, just to flat out exempt the type of housing is a good town policy. I think it prevents you from planning. And also just Don looking ahead, not that I want to totally mix the two issues, but that LD 2003 has an opportunity to truly impact what you might see. I don't want to spoil it, but they've got mechanisms in there that might require towns, or does require towns, to allow up to 2.5 times the amount of units that would otherwise be dedicated to in a zone. So if you have 2.5 times in, the TBC district, that might actually equal 10 units per net acre if they're sewered, right? And then it's an affordable housing project. They have no reason, we have no ability to even stop it, because it's now not required. I'm not saying stop it because I just want to slam the door and everything, but we can't even dictate that pace anymore, which was the purpose of the GMO. Because now they can come in with 10 residential units per net acre. And then they don't even have to come to us for the growth permits because it's an exempted class. What I'm saying is it could be a recipe for disaster, or at least it could impact our ability to really monitor and prepare for growth in the future when you build in an exemption and then a state override as to your density levels. That's the type of stuff that, if you're really trying to manipulate the system a little, you can, and we're open to it right now. That's my observation.
Great. Just before we move off that, I had a quick question for Tom, and I saw your hand there, John, so I forgot. But Tom, do we have a current accounting of how many affordable units we built, say, the past 5 years?
Mhm.
And
We do.
do we know roughly offhand what that is? I don't mean to presume,
Over the last 5 years, I'm estimating here, I would say probably 200
Yeah. All right.
over
So,
3 projects.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
So this one, I want to just kind of move to close. Or do we want to keep talking about the GMO or not? But I have enough affordable alone. I have enough agita to focus on that issue exclusively, if that's the only one. So I'm going to recommend that we, in our work, to kind of revisit the ordinance on hotels. I think we'll have share of mind and some energy to also take a look at the GMO, if nothing more than the affordable units and other things that are built in as, limit valves or not. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is, if I had an idea and I wanted to throw it out here, I imagine you guys could consume it and chew it up and spit it back out and tell me if it's a bad idea or worth pursuing, right? I mean, it's kind of, I think the purpose of this, right, is to welcome some ideas, and if they're no good, they won't go anywhere, right?
so I'm gonna make a motion that we consider add a cursory review of the GMO to try to identify areas for review. And I don't think this is going to require a lot of analysis, but there are 2 or 3 areas that we could look at discussing, and then also perhaps a time frame for when we might come back. I don't see a quick turn on this, and I want to make sure we have a broader discussion about it. But
It was a long motion, Don.
sorry. So I'm going to recommend that we look at the GMO as well for potential revisions from an ordinance standpoint. Look for a second on that.
Second,
Okay. And can we take a vote on that?
Council McGee,
yes.
Council Calucci,
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes, take a look at it, see what we can find. Thank you. John, so go ahead. I don't know if that would have hurt or helped that I didn't.
I was
call
just
you
gonna
first,
say,
but-
I think it's good to take a look at it. It's been a year, so doing a year in review at this point, and we've learned a lot, I think, and we've also learned a lot about the GMO exemption process. And so there might be some opportunities to figure out how we tighten that up a little bit, because I know that's been you know, a question mark that all of us keep raising is, well, what's really the process? We refer to Appendix A, but you know, is there's things that want to be done there to tighten that up a little bit more and add more language to make it clear to the developers and to the public what to expect when we go through a process like that. So I know that's been something we've talked about. So if you guys do dig into it, I would suggest you also kind of think about if there's opportunities to add more language or add more dimensions to that part of the ordinance, if you feel like that's still something worth going forward. And then from the affordability perspective, you know, I think retrospectively, yes, I agree with what I've heard from Councilor I was mixing Nick and McGee together. Nikki, I agree. Like, there's probably an opportunity to just add more parameters, because I think, again, what's been discussed and I agree with is that really this is about predictability, as Councilor Cucci mentioned, about ensuring that we know what's coming so that we can ensure it's not impacting our traffic and our infrastructure. And I think with some of the exemptions, even the council exemption, we've allowed for unpredictability in the process, which makes it really hard to plan. And so how can we tighten up the predictability a little bit more, just to make it more clear to us and the public what our commitment is to the pace? Because I think right now it's not clear. Yes, we have that 143 or 144, but that's really means nothing in the context of the entire document, I think, at this point. And so I think that's what I'm observing now in retrospect, is that the predictability that it was intended to do just isn't there anymore. And how do we make that better?
So just for clarification, the appendix that John is referring to relates to the contract zone amendment process and the definition of the public benefit. So we'll look at those. We'll look at that item as well as the affordable aspect to it. Nick, you have anything
I
else?
just want to follow up on Council Anderson's comments. I think he also touched on something that's really important, which is the predictability. I mean, we here are, you know, part of this government, and you want to have a predictable nature to our behaviors for the general public and for the developers. And they should know what to expect when they come to this community or choose to invest in this community. And which is why I always feel like it is hard 1 year later to sit there and say, we're going to shift this all around again, because now we're not adding to that predictability at all. But I think, as Councilor Anderson pointed out, we learned a lot of lessons having gone through this process with, you know, for 2 years, probably. I mean, I think the council made those great first steps with getting rid of fractionalization. That's a huge clarifying portion for us, and also sets an expectation level for the developers. But I think at the end of the day, you do want to end up with a final document that you can just kind of say, these are the rules of the game, and, you know, welcome to play here in Scarborough, as long as you play by these rules, and that, you know, we're not constantly shifting them around or finding ways for people to get around them by through either an exemption process or, you know, public. I think you just want consistency. It's just part of good government.
John, any other comments?
You know, the structure for the GMO is really designed around single family housing. And maybe there's a better way to do it, but in the process of trying to pace your single family housing, inadvertently you exclude the possibility of any multifamily development without some kind of mechanism to allow for it. That's where some of the 1-bedroom exemptions came in, and that's where some of the council exemptions came in. Because if you're building we've got an example at Mussey Road, right? They're going to put 120 units in there. We'll try to work that into our GMO. As one developer can only get 28 a year. You're talking a 5-year project, that adds a lot to the cost and appeal of developing a site. There might be another way to create that mechanism where things like that, if they are within the zoning, if they are not going to overwhelm resources, and it can be demonstrated to allow them to go through. So,
Thank you. Great point.
Councilor Hamel,
Yes, go ahead.
we do have a person in attendance who I think would like to make a public comment. Can we allow Brian Shumway to speak?
Great, thanks. And we'll also once we're done with Brian Shumway's comment, we'll ask for folks who may want to speak to that additionally here before we move on. But Brian,
Great.
Brian, go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Liam. Thanks, Councilor Hamel. Yeah, I guess there's 2 notes I want to make. The first is, to the question of revisiting the GMO exemption, and the it's a retooling things after a year. The thing I would caution you guys on is avoiding, I don't know, the temptation or the risk of you just addressing sour grapes that people have over the process. I really don't think that we'll see the impact of what's happened, until structures get built and structures get lived in, and maybe even structures get turned. Really, if we're talking about the impact of growth being the impact on resources and infrastructure, that impact doesn't occur, 12 months post permit issue. And so, I really, urge the three of you and however many are on the council to check yourself and check the temptation to revisit this too soon. And if it's pure intent to look at impact, wait until we see the impact before we really look at a wholesale revision, because that predictability matters, and impact matters. But let's look at real impact. The second thing I want to address, Nick, your comment about affordable housing is disturbing to me. And the thing that is apparent to me, I'm an affordable housing developer. I don't work generally in this state. And when I look in the town of Scarborough, the thing that occurs to me and is obvious to me, but maybe isn't obvious to others, is nobody, given the choice of building a single family home, is going to build a home that's affordable to somebody of lower or moderate income. So if we have a town policy and a values objective to create a balanced housing stock, which we do, all of the permits are going to be applied for by people building these $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 homes, and there never will be any affordable housing, but for these exemptions that we've created. And so if we're afraid of waitresses, if we're afraid of clerks working at stores, I don't know what kind of poor people we're afraid of, but we ought not be, and we ought to be doing whatever we can, to Tom's point, to advance the policies that we have and the values that that our town has articulated in our comprehensive plan. So I urge the three of you and the entire council to maintain exemptions for important policy objectives like affordable housing, and for technical oddities like John was mentioning with these one-bedroom apartments. So appreciate the time and the ears and the work that you guys are doing.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate your comments. So if there's any question that we're not willing to hear opposing voices on the matter, I think you probably get the answer to that. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Shumway, if you misunderstood what I was attempting to say there, I don't have a problem overall with affordable housing. My issue relates to the rate of growth in a community and being unable to regulate it. Plain and simple. In my world, housing is housing. That's the way I see it. And I think all of it has an impact, whether it's a multi-million-dollar mansion or a apartment complex. That is it. So to assume that I somehow do not like lower waged workers or anything of that sort is completely false. And I hope that clarifies anything that you may have interpreted for what I said.
Thank you. Any other comments from folks in the audience on this matter before we move off? Go ahead, Denise. Yeah, thanks.
Just one thing that really bothers me with the growth in Scarborough is, what it's doing to our schools. Whether it's single family homes or multifamily homes, you can, figure that there's a few children involved here. And, the last budget I looked at is, it costs close to $19,000 per child per year in this town. Well, $19,000 per child per year is not bringing money in from these houses. They're certainly not paying taxes by that much money. So the rest of us are. And a lot of these schools have trailers that the kids are going to school in. Fortunately, I don't have any kids in school anymore. My grandchildren are out of state. But it's just, these kids shouldn't be learning in trailers, and we shouldn't be building more houses left and right. And, not being able to afford to give our kids the proper education that they deserve, that we all probably had growing up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So with that, we're going to move to a third agenda item, accessory dwelling units. This is one of those things that's come over the transom while we're busy making plans. It's a state piece of legislation that's been passed and it's well along to implementation. So, and I didn't mean to usurp any authority or work by the town staff on this. I was just cruising the internet and found some stuff that was publicly available that's going on in other towns. So I figured we would, lead off with this as a discussion. And it's a good example of something that's happening that's basically overwhelming or basically completely superseding whatever might be in place in terms of trying to, control or growth in terms of certain number of units, certain type of growth, and allowing multiple units on single unit lots. So that's kind of why we tossed that out there. And I chatted with Liam ahead of time, so I didn't mean to preempt again any staff work on this, but this is something that's coming at us fairly quickly. And Tom, I thought maybe you could help me with the tee up for this. We'd asked Jean Marie to do it if she were here from a legislative standpoint, but if you could give us a handle on what you're seeing and your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, forgive me, I wasn't necessarily prepared to address this. What I will say, this did come as a bit of surprise. It really stormed through this last legislative session. The Maine Municipal Association was very actively involved and expressed a number of grave reservations with this approach. Though I think it was born in good intentions, it really does take a huge hit toward home rule and letting communities kind of determine for themselves what's good for them. And so that issue alone was a grave concern for MMA. And I suspect we all share that concern. Excuse me, I'm gonna tickle.
So what finally passed was much watered down than what initially came in the pipeline. I mean, initially they were removing our authority to have a growth management ordinance.
And what
And-
fell swoop.
Yep, just remove the authority, and that generated a lot of unrest. Municipal officers and MMA really went to fight for it. But I will say MMA was kind of on an island in this one, where you had just about every other lobbying organization supporting those moves. So I'm not going to say that this is done. This is kind of a first cut at it. It's a broad brush approach. And it's hard to understand what the impacts are going to be. I think the video that you shared did a good job of getting towards understanding what they are. But our zoning is unique. You're closer to it probably than most of us. So I don't know how concerned I am about what was actually passed. But it's certainly something we're going to have to understand in the next 9 months or so.
Yeah, that's fair. And we're in the point right now, and I think every other community is really still digesting it, frankly. There's still impacts that aren't quite fully understood. It's job number one for my new planning director at the end of next month to start to dig into this. I would fully expect there will be some sort of cleanup legislation at the next session. I think MMA is actively working on that as we speak. So it's not to say I don't want to get too concerned about this. I want to make sure we understand the impact, but I do expect that there'll be hopefully some improvements. So at least we all understand what it means and what are the implications. So it's very much in process, Mr. Chairman.
Nick, go ahead.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Tom.
I think Tom, when you first started, this was probably born out of, a good place, which is, I think most anyone who was living here in Maine over the last 5 years really saw the ability to move into those, either like a ranch style home for any type of affordable price, it just skyrocketed. It's crazy what happened to our real estate market. So I think this was probably some attempt to, provide some relief or at least incentivize developers to provide, you know, those more affordable housing options throughout the state. Realizing that, you know, your quote unquote average Mainer was really having a hard time, you know, getting themselves into a new home. So again, born from good intentions, I do worry, as I mentioned previously, about the impacts this is going to have on development in general and what, you know, in the home rule aspect of that. I mean, they really are kind of superseding some of the, you know, the local ordinances, what we feel we're comfortable and prepared to deal with. And that's what's, I think, is, you know, quote unquote frightening. I don't know if there's a better word for it, concerning, I guess. So those are my thoughts on that. I guess, is there going to be, I mean, I have the Natalie Burns video here linked, but is there, Tom, do you foresee that some sort of other educational piece coming our way on this sometime?
I think we really need to develop and talk about it in terms of our local context. I think that video was helpful in kind of identifying the issues that we all need to be understanding at a local level. That's my job, is I'd like to bring to the council an appreciation for what does it mean to us, if you will. And ideally, my hope is that there'll be some cleanup legislation that makes it a little more manageable and add some clarity as well.
Thanks, Tom. I mean, for those who, you know, want to read more on the topic, if you look at the agenda, there's a link to the PDF presentation, but there's also a video in which Natalie Burns goes through this with another municipality, but basically is talking about allowing a minimum footprint of units of 190 square feet, you know, on lots. You know, those really completely transform the guidelines we have in our zoning in terms of number of units per acre. So I think on this one, I don't know that there's anything immediate to do on this other than just drawing people's attention to it, number one. And number two, I think most of the things are required to be implemented a year from now of July of 2023. So I think we, you know, obviously have time to do that. It did look like there was something in August, some initial requirement in early August, but this is something we'll be following staff's leadership on this. But I thought as long as we were talking about it, this is sort of the elephant in the room, you know, possibly the single biggest thing that's going to have an impact on our ability to manage number of units.
Yeah, I should say the August 8 date is the effective date. So any legislation is effective 90 days after the adjournment. So you might recall this LD 290, I think it is, with property tax freeze. It has the same effective date. So that's what that is.
Thanks, Tom. So I don't know if there's any other comments or questions on that one. That's anything from the public on that other than more stuff coming your way. So with that, the last two agenda items had to do with light industrial zone, and you know, I thought that if we would want to take the opportunity for public comment on that one. There was some issues, and then John, I think you had brought up some issues that maybe Denise would like to do that. But maybe you go first, Jeff. Go ahead.
So just to kind of maybe offer some of the insights I think that I gained, and some of this I'm going to paraphrase that wasn't me, it came from Angela Blanchett. So I don't know, Tom, if you want to chime in if I say anything wrong, because what seemed like a simple thing turned into a bigger thing. So I think what it started with Denise Hamilton attending a planning board meeting asking about no through trucks on Two Rod Road. And when I brought that to Tom and Angela to address, because the question was really, how do we get that road posted as no through trucks? I think Angela took that ordinance, talked to legal, and there were just a lot of issues, I think, within the ordinance and the language as they started to review it together outside of the request that came in, where, you know, part of the perspective as I understand it was there's some things in the ordinance that are essentially prohibitive to what is interpreted as the intent of the light industrial district for certain lots that are in that zone. You know, again, the hypothesis that I heard was that, you know, as it was designed, as the ordinance was designed for that particular district, they were only maybe considering certain lots as they were writing it, not thinking of the consequences for other lots that really, I think, abut Two Rod Road or have access to Two Rod Road. And so I think legal has been engaged and they've given some guidance on things that need to be changed. And I would just suggest as this committee looks at that you also consider the no through truck request that came in through Denise. I also think we had suggested potentially having long range planning potentially look at this, really to kind of first align on the policy intent, because again, a lot of them were there when this was created, so they might have some backstory to be able to look at it to say, oh yeah, we did this on purpose, that was by design, and this is why. And so again, that was a suggestion that we had, but again, would ultimately need to come to ordinance based on any of the long range planning suggestions. I don't know, Tom, if there's anything
No,
else.
I think it's fair. We've identified some, I think, inconsistencies in the way it's currently drafted. And I think the ordinance needs some attention and some rework. I think the counselor's suggestion of long range, using them to maybe do some of the advanced work might save you some time and effort. And I think there would be some value, because I do think a number of the folks that currently serve on the long range were part of that conversation 5 or 6 years ago when that zone was when that requirement was imposed. So we wholeheartedly acknowledge that some more work needs to be done.
Yeah, just to refresh everybody on light industrial, it's a district that provides for small light industrial development and established Holmes Road as a gateway to the west side of town. And the new development, the thinking of that district was that new development with redevelopment of existing uses should create an attractive business/industrial park environment with a roadside buffer along Holmes Road residential properties and along the Two Rod Road to the west of the district. And that was thought to be a substantial buffer. So that's the way it's written. And Denise, I know you had anything you'd like to add to this, and thank you for raising your hand on it. Thanks.
Yeah, with the no through trucks, the other end of Two Rod between Scotto Hill and Payne Road is no through. Granted, that's twisty windy, but Two Rod Road, there's a reason why it's called Two Rod Road. It's 2 rods wide. It's 33 feet wide versus 50 feet wide of your average road. If trucks in the soon to be developed properties of Beach Ridge Motor Speedway, either the speedway or the parking lot across the street, if their trucks are starting to be allowed to come down because traffic is too heavy on Holmes Road and they're using Two Rod Road, you get 2 trucks coming down Two Rod and go around that bend, there is going to be problems. And Scarborough Cross Country uses Two Rod Road to train on. And those kids are running down our road. And if any trucks come by, it's going to be disastrous. Not to mention, it's not safe for us to walk in our own neighborhood or walk our dogs. I used to walk my 8 years ago, and the long range planning had implemented the light industrial in 2013. So 9 years ago. Even then, I was able to walk my dog every morning and every night. I don't dare, especially now that it's been repaved. It's even worse with the speeding. So I would request that you strongly consider making us a no through truck, and so that it's only deliveries for the people residing on Two Rod for trucks to come down, so that the newly developed sites are not using our road. And the other thing I would ask is the allowed uses. Now, I had attended fair amount of the meetings for the marijuana ordinance, and I must have missed when it was presented to council. I was thinking it was at the start of COVID, but the dates here are before COVID. Is a lot of the discussion was it was going to be in industrial areas, not light industrial and not to the west of the turnpike. This is too close to homes. I have a grower right next door to me. And granted, he's gotten better and he's always apologizing because we always know when he's harvesting. And I can't imagine a large scale commercial manufacturing cultivator, whatever you want to call them, harvesting. I mean, then that's going to tap into the good neighbor ordinance where, you know, I mean, 2 years ago when our neighbors when it was really bad, we couldn't open our windows. We couldn't sit out on our deck. We couldn't have fire in our fire pit because the smell was so horrendous. We have an in-home business and we have customers come and go, guess you got someone growing pot in your neighborhood, huh? Pretty strong smell today. Doesn't look good for us running a business. So I would ask for that to be looked at as well. And then if you could just clarify for me, in the light industrial number 13 warehousing facility, it says exclusive of mini warehouse storage facility. Is that meaning a fixed, you know, mini storage buildings like they have on Mussey? Or, I mean, what's the
I don't know the answer to that.
intent for that?
I believe it does refer to, I'm not sure of Muzzy, there's one on Running Hill Road. It's the one with the kind of roll up doors. There
Right.
might be 200 or 300 square feet in individual units that are leased on a monthly basis.
And fixed, not
Fixed.
movable. So how would the projected proposal for the parking lot across from Beach Ridge is shipping containers? How does that fall in light industrial? Because that's before planning board right now. And I've raised it and my questions not being answered. And I've read through it and I've been trying to research and it's just,
I don't know.
we're going to look like a mini commercial street over on Holmes Road.
So I appreciate you bringing up these issues, and I know a couple of them go off into the final topic, marijuana. We'll come back to marijuana cultivation, but Tom, I did want to flip back to the point Denise made about I've received a couple of emails about the speed and the traffic safety hazards on Two Broad. Is there anything we can do there in terms of posting speed limits or, you know, but it does seem to me that that's a concern and, you know, a current worry.
Yeah, if it's not posted, we could certainly post it.
Been a while since we've revisited on the traffic ordinance, which is the gnarliest ordinance of any, for my money.
If someone could be more specific as to which section of the road is most problematic, we can do speed studies to assess whether the current speed limit is appropriate or it can be lowered.
I'll check my emails and come up with the
Okay.
person, but I recall it was somebody else, it was a neighbor, and but we'll locate that and follow up. But thanks, Tom.
And as Ms. Hamilton says, often, once we pave a road, we do see that the activity does pick up, unfortunately.
And thanks for the history on that. I never knew that. Two Broad Road. So I learn something new every day. Thank you. We're going to spend a quick minute on marijuana cultivation. And my wind up on this is always when we did this, it was Jean Marie and me, and I think it was Ken Johnson was on the committee, and we went steadily through this over 18 months. It was a long walk. And I know at that time, there was a lot of concern about, you know, where cultivation and various processing would be allowed. And I know that there was a big emphasis on restricting that to industrial areas. The one thing that, you know, that's been motivating it so far is you have folks that want to do cultivation and that, you know, there's a changing opinion about marijuana or cannabis and hemp, that it, you know, it should be treated like really any other agricultural activity that it's allowed in a in an RF zone. So the only thing I can commit to is that we're gonna go slowly on this. I know there are a couple of operators. There's another one off the Broad Turn Road, who operates a lawn care business, Paul Beaver, who is interested in this. So I just want to make sure we are careful to balance the desire for a couple of operators to move this forward with the conducting a broader review of this and making sure that we hear from the rest of the public and are deliberate. So and we don't have a process yet, other than that one is cycling, and we're getting feedback from long range and also the planning board, which we'll take into account. But that does not necessarily mean we're going to do it, anytime soon or at all until we complete a public process. Any comment on marijuana cultivation? And any suggestion? Well, I guess we got a couple of agenda items for next time. We're going to talk about, we're going to come back on innkeeper's license and also GMO, right? And related ADU aspects. And Allison, yes, I'm not trying to skate past you there. That you would jump up when I said marijuana.
So thank you very much. And I just wanted to comment, and I've already commented before. First of all, just so you're aware, the long range planning meeting was not available online on Friday. When you try to get the agenda, you need Google access or, whatever the messaging is. And it hasn't been posted to watch the video, but I just bumped into Karen Martin and she said she'd send it to me. So that's great. And I did get access to you couldn't even get the agenda. So I did get access to the agenda and I saw what the recommendation, well, at the first meeting, the recommendation was to increase the setback from 50 to 100 feet. This is for rural farmland, and then get a planning board opinion. But then I also noticed Karen's memo that it went back to I'm going to say one property owner, okay, in Scarborough. One property owner is driving this and didn't meet the performance standard because the building he wants to grow in is 98 feet setback versus 100. So now we're going back to ask, will we make it 98 feet? And I just think it's so wrong that we're bending over backwards for one property owner when it impacts the rest of the town. And I think there were a lot of property owners in Scarborough who was very vocal about not wanting to have marijuana grown in a general area. And I can say, when you're talking about odor, I live at Higgins. I have days, nights where I'll open my window and somebody will be smoking marijuana down on the beach and it comes wafting into my house. And, it's a very powerful smell. And, I don't think it's fair to put the whole town, go through the exercise again with the entire town to assist one person who I think originally inquired about a contract zone review. And this is the approach versus looking at it from a contract zone. I would say the same thing about the utility scale solar farm, which I've already spoke up about because that's still under discussion. And again, it's one person and we're willing to start cutting down trees and planting on, changing the ordinance already because there's one individual who has the opportunity to lease their land to an out-of-state energy company and basically wants to put in, a farm that's basically a power plant in a residential area. So I hope that you will consider not doing this or consider overlays, as has been discussed before, because neither of them really belong in residential neighborhoods, no matter how they're zoned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and one other
Yes.
thing, again, you mentioned the word predictability. And this is exactly what I'm talking about, that if you live in rural farmland that's become a catch-all, and there is no predictability because anytime somebody wants to do something, it changes the feel of your neighborhood. So it's, the predictability is as important to the people who are already living in an area as, that they live there for a reason. They want to maintain the character and the aesthetic of what's there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to respond to that for a minute. We have tried to refocus our quasi judiciary committees on their role, which is basically to apply and interpret zoning ordinances. So, and Nick, I think could probably speak to this better than anybody as former planning board director, but maybe you could help us with that, and also sort of the long range planning committee. Their role is really to kind of guide the development and implementation of the comprehensive plan, but it does, sometimes I think we get into let's make a deal, or let's be accommodating, or trying to, encourage people to, who want to do something with a zoning change. And I think as time goes by, we really need to remind ourselves of what the strict role is by definition, and then how we apply it in it. Thank you. Nick, you want to comment on that? You don't have to. No, okay. He didn't raise his hand. So that's all for now. Unless there's any further comment, we'll wrap promptly at 5:20 something. If I get a motion to adjourn, please.
Second,
All right.
yes.
Yes, meeting adjourned 5:27.